Hello, everyone. My name is Rita Atake, and welcome to UAV Scholarly Sharing Initiative. This is our first session for the semester, so we're pretty excited to begin. On behalf of the organizers of the Scholarly Sharing Initiative, I would like to begin by respectfully acknowledging that UAV is located on the ancestral territories of the Stalu people. The computer servers making these presentations possible today are located at UAV's Abbotsford campus, and we would like to acknowledge the Sumas, Musqueam, and Kwantlen First Nations, the closest neighbors of UAV's Abbotsford campus. I identify as an immigrant settler, and I am very privileged to live and work in these territories. The SSI was founded in 2011 by UAV professors Rita Damon and Chantel Mahler as an informal space for the sharing of scholarship and work in progress by members of UAV community. We gratefully acknowledge the support of UAV's Office of Research, Engagement and Graduate Studies and the College of Arts. Some housekeeping. Following the presentations, there will be a time for some questions. Alex Wetmore from the UAV Department of English and Amy, who are also SSI organizers, will be moderating. We ask that you please type your questions into the chat. The moderators will read out the questions during the question period, and you can put your questions into the chat at any time, so no need to wait till the end. And as indicated, this presentation is being recorded. The presenters today are Noah Schwartz from Political Science, who will be presenting on Target, Unpacking the Influence of the National Rifle Association of America, NRA. And our next presenters will be Shelley Canning and Candice Kaus, Director, UAV Center for Education and Research on Aging. And they will be presenting on perceptions and projections of children's understanding of aging and dementia. And now I would like to invite Dr. Schwartz for his presentation. Dr. Schwartz, we can't hear you.
Sorry about that. I thought I pressed unmute. How embarrassing at this stage in the pandemic to be making that mistake. All right, welcome everyone. So everyone can hear me? All right, so what I'm going to talk about today, let me just share my screen. All right, everyone can see hopefully the presentation now. What I'm going to talk about today, and I'll just start my timer, is my research that has been published just this month in a book on target, gun culture, storytelling, and the NRA. So I'm really excited that the book is coming out this month, and I wanted to be able to share a little bit about what I did in writing it with everyone here. So the book really tackles this kind of unique puzzle, the relationship of America and Americans with firearms, which is somewhat unique in the global north. So during the pandemic, for example, American gun sales reached record levels. In 2020, Americans bought almost 23 million guns. And then in 2021, they bought 20 million more. So in a space of only 2 years, Americans bought enough guns to arm the entire nation of Canada with change to spare. So from an outsider's perspective, it's kind of difficult to understand gun politics in the United States. We kind of think at the personal level, why are Americans so attached to guns? Why do people like this young woman in the picture on the slide feel the need to own firearms? Sorry, I just realized I think I'm showing the wrong slide. Let's swap that. Is that better? Can you see the presentation slide now? Sorry, I thought I'd set it up properly, but that did not work.
Yes, that's perfect.
Excellent. Sorry again about that. So at the personal level, we wonder about people's motivations for owning guns. At the macro level, though, we wonder why the political system in the United States is so resistant to change. Especially when we look at public opinion in the United States, we see it pretty consistently There's support for increased gun control since the 1970s in surveys. So when we think about the answer to this puzzle, the question that's usually proposed in popular explanations is the NRA, the National Rifle Association. And the sort of popular understanding of the NRA's influence in politics is through money, campaign donations, the sort of purchasing of influence in American politics. But when we sort of hold a microscope of academic scholarship up to that explanation, we find it doesn't hold a lot of water. So on the one hand, we know that the NRA is not by any means the biggest spender on Capitol Hill. There are a lot of groups that spend a lot more money than they do with much worse results in the end. We know that the gun industry in the United States, while it's bigger than the gun industry in any other country, it's actually relatively small. So even in 2019, when a few states were just starting to legalize marijuana, the legal marijuana industry was still bigger than the gun industry. Finally, we know from the literature that spending doesn't always translate to influence on Capitol Hill. Senators and members of Congress have a lot of things that they have to take into consider when making decisions. And while campaign donations are one of them, it's not the only consideration. So then how do we explain the influence of the NRA? So my project sort of joined this group of scholars that has recently recognized that it's really the NRA's ability to mobilize their membership, to bring a lot of very motivated people to bear at key times and places in politics that allows them to have this dominance over the gun policy in the United States. So we know that Americans are more likely to vote, American gun owners, are more likely to vote, to write their elected representatives, to give money to parties and groups than non-gun owners. And the NRA is a big actor in making that happen. So that's what I tried to look at with my project. How can we understand, how does the NRA create this very mobilized, this very motivated group of people that they can then use to put pressure on policymakers? So to do this, I went inside the NRA. What did that look like? I started off from my office in Ottawa doing content analysis. So I looked at the American Rifleman magazine, which has been published continuously, I think, for 70 or 80 years in the United States. It goes out to millions of Americans every month from the NRA, and it's a really key communications modality that they have to talk to their membership. I looked at NRA TV, which was the NRA's online television network, which until 2019 was available on platforms like Apple TV, like Roku, thousands of hours of content created by the NRA for people to watch. I did my fieldwork in Virginia and in Indianapolis, which involved going to the NRA Firearms History Museum. One of the things that first got me interested in this project was trying to understand why the heck the NRA has a museum. We don't think of advocacy groups in museums necessarily together, and especially guns in museums, but they have three. So I visited one of them on multiple occasions and kind of did an analysis of how it works. I did participant observation at a number of NRA events. So I went to the NRA annual meeting, which I describe in the book as like Comic-Con for gun owners. If there are any, comic book or superhero fans here, maybe a better metaphor would be a giant conference, like think the Congress of the Humanities. So there were tens of thousands of gun owners, NRA members congregating on Indianapolis. There was a very, very large gun show, as big as I think 2 or 3 football fields attached to this. There were political speeches by Donald Trump, by Mike Pence, by other sort of NRA celebrities, and seminars talking to gun owners about things like everything from sort of hunting to gun cleaning to how to be better advocates for the Second Amendment. So there was a lot of politics going on at these events. The NRA is also one of the biggest providers of firearms safety classes in the United States. They teach over 1 million Americans every year in their classes. So I took 5 of these classes. I wanted to understand the role that they played in their political program. So you can see on the slide, there's my certificate from one of the courses where I took their concealed carry class. And this certificate entitles me to apply for a concealed carry permit in the state of Virginia, just from completing this NRA class. I went to several gun shows and went to range days with participants, as well as conducting semi-structured interviews with both NRA members and a few people working for the NRA. So what came out of this? The picture on the slide, there's me. I set up this booth at a gun show to recruit participants for my sort of short online survey that I used to supplement my interviews, which was one of the strangest experiences of my life, I have to say. It was a lot of culture shock. In Lynchburg, Virginia, home of Liberty University, of Jerry Falwell fame. So what I found from these is that the NRA is effective at mobilizing people to sort of advocate and to fight for what they see as their gun rights, because the NRA are very good storytellers, and they're very good at political socialization. And what's interesting is that they use a lot of the same tools that the government does for their political socialization. So for teaching people to be political, and in this sense, political in relation to guns. So they use things like the classroom, like the museum, places where ordinary Americans learn how to be American. The NRA uses this to teach gun owners to be a political force. They do this using several macro narratives, so sort of big stories that their other communications kind of feed into. The first one most people will probably be familiar with, it's the good guy with the gun. So this idea of a heroic individual using a firearm to save themselves or their community. They also work hard to tie gun ownership to ideas about American freedoms. When I interview people in the United States and I ask them, like, what do guns mean to you? Often the first word out of their mouth is freedom. And this isn't an accident. The NRA repeats this over and over. And interestingly as well, the NRA works really hard to tie guns to American culture and history. So to present them as sort of a uniquely American object tied to this American history of freedom and liberty. When we sort of think about this and unpack this, we can think about, guns have played a significant role in the histories of a lot of countries. America isn't the only country that had a revolution, and that had a revolution based on these early liberal values. But the NRA works hard to sort of tie guns into the story of America, America's culture, America's past. On the personal level, so looking at trying to understand better why people own guns, I met some really interesting people on my journey that kind of nuanced the way that I think about gun ownership in the United States. So for many people who I spoke to, guns were tied to recreation and even to family and community. So I talked to Timothy and Sam, for example, a father and son that I interviewed. They were both Boy Scout leaders and members of their church. And Sam had just kind of gone off to university very, very far away. So when they were together, guns sort of formed a part of kind of how they connected. Even though they were now far apart for a long time, when they got together, they would always go to the range together. So guns kind of got tied into their family dynamic. I also talked to Susan, who was sort of the prototypical Northern Virginia, DC area person. She was a government worker. She lived in the suburbs. She was a triathlete and she would jog around her neighborhood. But on her spare time, she was also a gun enthusiast. And for her, guns were really tied up into her relationship with her father, who'd passed away just a few months before we met. So when we went to the range together, she kind of pulled out, I still remember this like little felt sack that she had with an oilcloth wrapped around it, her dad's old revolver. And you could see she treated it with a lot more reverence than the other guns she'd taken to the range. And for her, shooting was kind of tied into her memories with her dad. For other people, guns were more related to security and safety. I interviewed a parole officer, for example. She was an African-American woman living in a city that's fairly famous for not being particularly safe. And she'd been stalked by her clients in the past. She'd received death threats and letters. And she told me that she slept with a loaded shotgun under her bed. So for her, guns were really a sort of response to this insecurity that state institutions just in her mind weren't able to respond to, possibly because of her positionality. So what's next? Obviously this research, if you want to read more about it, I'll talk about my book on the next slide. What I'm doing now, so as I was sort of completing this project, I started to look into gun politics in Canada. And that's what I'm working on now on the book that I'm working on with University of Alberta Press, targeted the Canadian pro-gun movement. So I'm doing survey research and interviews with gun owners and advocates on different sides of the issue in Canada to try to make sense of this idea of gun rights in the Canadian context. So what does it mean for advocates in Canada to make this claim to having gun rights in a country where there's no explicit constitutional protection? And the courts have been very clear that Canadians don't have a right to bear arms. So that's the next thing. If you're interested, I'm doing a book launch with Polytalk Thursday, November 3rd. You can learn more about the book. I'm going to be doing a reading from it. Oh, it's not going to focus. If you want to hear it. It's November 3rd at 4 o'clock in A225. Thanks so much. And I'm looking forward to answering everybody's questions.
Thank you, Noah. That was super interesting. If any attendees have any questions, you can put them into the chat or the Q&A. Either one would work, and they'll get to us, and we can moderate those. I didn't see yet any come up just yet, but lots to think about. And I'm happy to get the ball rolling, actually, if that's okay. I mean, I was just fascinated. I have so many questions about your experience, and you know, how you went about this. Like, did you and sort of your thought process, but also maybe like what kind of support or approval process did you have to go through academically through your institution? Or was this something that you sort of had to find ways to make this work? So I was wondering about that, but also for me from the English department, can you talk more about the storytelling? Like, were there any critics or scholars or theories or concepts? The macro narrative was an interesting topic for me. So where did you come across this concept and how are you employing it? Can you expand on that a little?
Yeah, so I guess I'll do the conceptual one first and then the experience one. The framework that I use is called the narrative policy framework. So basically, scholars of public policy are increasingly realizing that stories play a big role in politics. We know that storytelling is an effective method of, for example, convincing people. Whereas, you know, if you use just sort of dry facts, people will either tune out or, you know, it'll motivate their I forget the name of the psychological effect, but when you hear something that doesn't fit with your worldview and your brain just rejects it. So it'll activate that defensive bias. That's what it is. Whereas storytelling has a way of, because narratives, you know, transport the audience, they have a way of getting around some of those defense mechanisms and sort of spreading political messages in ways that people don't always realize. So I'm just going to stop my timer so it doesn't go off. Yeah, so the narrative policy framework, it's a way of kind of understanding how that works in politics. And yeah, that's what I found most interesting was the way that just the impact of these narratives and the way that the NRA is very clever in tying sort of stories back to them. So for example, in their magazine, they have this column called The Armed Citizen, where every month they'll tell stories of people defending their lives with guns. And so when you read this story over and over, it gives your brain the perception that this is something that happens frequently. Whereas when you look at the statistics, you know, we're not quite sure how often defensive gun use happens, and it's probably less frequently than most NRA members think in the US. As far as the sort of procedural part of it, how did I go about doing the research? So this was kind of based off the work of Jennifer Carlson, a sociologist, who did an ethnography of gun carry in Michigan. So she actually lived there, she carried a gun. And so I sort of adapted her methodology to political science. And I was really excited when she was one of the members on my committee. She was the external reviewer. Yeah, so I was sort of on my own. Like I found it was my first time navigating the ethics review process. And I found that quite funny because all the ethics review, right, it's making sure that you're not harming your participants. And I actually had to write on my ethics review form, like, my participants have guns. Like, I think I'm more worried about them harming me. Yeah, so that was interesting to navigate. And then I was a visiting scholar at George Mason University while I was there. So I kind of had a home base and a little bit of support from the political science department there. But for the most part, I was on my own. So the classes, the NRA firearm safety classes, were a good way to meet participants. That's what Dr. Carlson had done in her ethnography. So I adopted that approach. And then just sort of like networking from there, talking to people. They said, hey, there's a gun show this weekend in Virginia. So I, shot off a quick ethics revision to the ethics review board, and then went and collected data there. So yeah.
Fascinating. Thank you for that capsule review of that whole process. Amy, I think we've received a few questions. Do you have a sense of
yes
ones came in first, or do you want to read out some of these? Yeah.
Of course. Thank you, Noah. This is such a fascinating research. I think last part of your comment actually tied to the question from Heather. She asked, did or do you feel as though your work puts you at any kind of risk among NRA members? Just thinking about how much participation in actual events and meetings your research has included, something which as a literature scholar have little experience with. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, for the most part, my experiences were really positive. So first of all, I always like self-identified. I'm a researcher. I think the fact that I was from Canada was helpful in some ways, but also a US citizen, because I wasn't sort of seen as connected to any hostile political force. And I also made sure like my project my project does not take a stance on gun control in the United States. The purpose was not like to answer normative questions about gun control. It was to sort of understand the influence of this organization and better understand gun politics in Canada. So that helped sort of disarm people's, any suspicions that they might have of me. But, I talk in the book about kind of gaining participant trust as a major issue in the research project, because I am this kind of like bespectacled Jewish academic from Canada who doesn't fit the image of a gun owner. But I think a lot of it, like the background research that I did, really, really helped. I know how to talk the talk. They knew that I was knowledgeable about firearms. I knew how they worked. I wasn't kind of making any of the classic mistakes that politicians make sometimes when they talk about guns. So that helped me fit in. And then I remember like at the concealed carry class, for example, they ended up at the beginning, they said, at first we didn't know what to make of you, but then we saw you shoot and we figured you're okay. So it was there sort of that earning their begrudging respect part of it, which was something interesting, because it was like one of my first experiences with guns. I did not grow up in an environment where guns were normal. So
thank you so much. It's such fascinating answer, and I also wonder this ties to some of what Candice is asking here about different cultures that experience gun culture. So she asks, do you see or anticipate to see the same symbolic?
Oh, Amy's frozen for the moment. Symbolic attachment to the gun object, I'll just pick up, I guess, in Canada, because of the way media and internet tends to homogenize values across certain subcultures that don't always follow national borders. Yeah, interesting. Think about like different subcultures beyond this sort of national one. Yeah, Noah, do you have any responses to that question? Sorry, Amy.
Yes, I think it is starting to happen a little bit, and you do see a little bit of sort of freedom talk sneaking in to the Canadian pro-gun movement. But from my interviews in Canada, and from sort of a little bit of the previous literature that's out there, we really see that Canadian gun owners think of guns in a very different way. So they're more tied to their utility as objects. So their utility as objects for hunting, for sports shooting. There's less of that political symbolism attached to them, whereas American gun owners really see firearms as symbols. And part of that is because we don't have a strong gun lobby in Canada. I think telling those stories, but also because in Canada we have this gun licensing process, the Canadian government controls the classroom and access to who has guns and who doesn't, and they do storytelling in the classroom as well. And they do, I think, a good job of socializing gun owners in Canada. Because when I talk to Canadian gun owners, ask them the same question, what do guns mean to you? The first word out of their mouth is almost always responsibility. And I think part of that has to do with this political socialization and political culture in Canada.
Shelley also asked a question here. How did you maintain that neutral stance to the participants without disclosing your beliefs? I think you've addressed that a little bit. But were you able to, do you want to speak a bit more to that? And also, what led to adopting that belief? Maybe if we could ask, or like, did you think about whether to be more normative or remain more sort of objective, or trying to aspire to something like that in this project?
Yeah, so that was a lot of the thought that went into it at the beginning. That's because, once again, like I really tried to immerse myself in the broader gun culture while I was doing this project, and just kind of doing my homework, like listening to podcasts, watching just obscene amounts of time on YouTube, getting to know like the YouTube environment there. And it let me, I think it let me talk to people in a way that allayed those suspicions, because there's a lot of suspicion of the mainstream media and of institutions like academia in that culture. And there was always that fear, I think, among participants that I was doing the kind of Michael Moore style hit piece, just going in and saying, look how, depraved these people are. and I was very clear about that from the beginning, that that's not what I was trying to do. And it, you know, I had ethics forms that, and this was all, you know, clearly stated in my ethics forms that people could sign. So I think that helped, but I think really also being able to kind of talk the talk was really, really helpful. I think the you know, so much of interaction within subcultures is based on jargon and language, and when you can clearly show that you speak the language, it's a really useful way of gaining trust. So I think that's the you know, ethnography. It's a really useful research method for gaining deep knowledge, but at the same time you have to put the work into it, and you really have to love it, because if not, you're not going to be able to. If you don't have an interest, you're not going to be able to put the hours in that have to go into this.
Thank you. Am I still frozen or am I good?
You're good.
Good. I just want to jump in to say that we received another question from the attendees. Thank you. And I think this really ties well to the question of methodology. This is a question from Ian. He asks, very fascinating book. Congrats on publication. Congratulations. And the question is about what sorts of methods you used for approaching different interview or questionnaire subjects. Did you ask for someone's gender and ethnic or racial backgrounds, or was that directly volunteered? Income levels, age, how much did this sort of index impact your results and patterns or conclusions discussed in your research? Thank you.
Yeah, so the interviews were semi-structured. So they were more sort of about ideas surrounding gun ownership. I didn't ask as many demographic questions, but a lot of people addressed that directly in our interviews and our talks, just because it was a more personal interview style, right? We'd usually go to the range first, we'd get coffee, things like that. And a lot of the participants did sort of bring up elements of their identity and how that interacted with gun ownership. So I mentioned Timothy and Sam, right? So Sam, as a young person, he wasn't old enough to apply for his concealed carry license yet. And he talked about, you know, he didn't own guns himself, but his dad did. And I asked him, I'm like, well, why don't, you know, you're over the age of 18, you're old enough to buy guns in Virginia, and you're clearly very passionate about them. Why don't you? And he talked about feeling that without having a concealed carry license, because he was African-American, that if a police officer like pulled him over and saw him that he had a gun, that could go the wrong way for him. So it was interesting to have some of those conversations where you do see things like gender and race really coming to the forefront of the conversation, but very sort of holistically, with the participants kind of bringing it up themselves.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think now might be a good time to, so thank you so much, Noah, to maybe turn the floor over to our second set of presenters, and maybe we'll get a chance to come back to some of Noah's points too, if questions come up at the end. Yeah, if that works for everyone, welcome Shelley and Candace, and we'll cede the floor to you.
Great. Thank you, Alex. I think everybody, I hope, can see the slides here, and I'm just going to set my timer. So I'm Shelley Canning. I am the director of UFB's Center for Education and Research on Aging, and I'm also a professor in the nursing department. This is a project that I have thought about for several years, and last year had a sabbatical, so was lucky enough to be able to pull it all together. And over the next few minutes, what I'm going to do is just kind of lay out the project that we worked on. So last year was a year of project conception, community partnerships, building a research team, gathering the data. And this year we're engaged more in the knowledge dissemination piece of it. So after I do the beginning parts, Candace is going to take over for me. So the research team you see there is a multidisciplinary team. We have, it was a partnership with the school district, the local school district here in Abbotsford. So Elise St. Martin, a classroom teacher, Joanne Brown, a nurse, Darren Blakeborough, a UFB sociologist, and then the last three names are some excellent undergrad student researchers. So we really benefited from having, I think, a robust and fabulous team. So this project was all about better understanding children's perceptions of age and dementia, and the question is, why is something like this important? For someone like me who works a lot in aging, both clinically and as a researcher, there's a demographic imperative that we really can't escape. The students today are going to be at the peak of their careers at a time when there's disproportionate number of older people. And I think the other imperative is just that simply it's the right thing to do. We need to do better with the way we treat older people. And I begin all of my classes usually with the statement that's on the slide there. The ways that we understand older people and people living with dementia determines the ways that we treat them. And I see that all the time. It's borne out. And so it's really important to look at stereotypes, prejudices, and discriminations. And this idea of ageism and in fact dementiaism, which is the correlate to folks who live with dementia, has become increasingly important. And last year we saw the WHO release a really important report on ageism globally, and really reinforce ageism as that one ism that intersects with all other isms. If we are all lucky enough to live longer, we will experience it. We know from the literature and scholarship that ageism begins early and it's reinforced very easily over time, and that it's really associated with some very poor health outcomes. What this report did do was focus a bit on some of the strategies that can be used to reduce ageism. And that's where I get excited, because the second and third one, education and intergenerational connections, I think are things that we can do in our roles, certainly for me as a clinician and a health educator, but I think it goes beyond being housed within sort of health sciences type of places. So the study that we conducted over the last year is about perceptions and projections. And it's built around these two research questions. So the first being, what are the attitudes, beliefs, and values held by students across grade levels? So we partnered, as I said, with School District 34, and we were able to get really positive partnering with a kindergarten teacher, a teacher in a split grade 3-4, a teacher in a grade 7 class, and a teacher in grade 12. So these were 4 different schools spread around Abbotsford School District, which is quite a large school district. And then the second phase of it was to look at what was the impact of having some targeted age and dementia awareness understanding, or age and awareness education on the understandings of students. And we targeted that grade 3-4 classroom. And so Elise St. Martin is the teacher of that classroom, and she was the one who participated the most in the study with us. And the design then really involved sort of 3 main activities. So the first one was to explore across these grade levels broadly what students knew and thought about old people and people who live with dementia. And we don't know a lot about that. So it was, I think it was a kind of a unique study in the sense that we did explore across ages. And then to have that, those series of drawings is what we asked them to do. Draw first an older person, secondly, a person who lives with dementia. And we used those drawings to inform the creation of a series of modules that we taught. And then the third piece is the knowledge dissemination piece. And Candace has created and curated an exhibition. And Alex, you said you saw it. So we're just opening this art exhibition at the Abbotsford Art Gallery. So just quickly, I'm going to show you just a handful of pictures, and the analysis, we're still working on the analysis of this data, but In a nutshell, in the grade 1 class, when you're 5 and 6 years old, being old just simply means being older than me. And none of the students had any sense of what dementia meant, so they really only drew one set of pictures. Some of the affects that they drew were positive, some were neutral, but there really wasn't a very negative sense among them. In the grade 3-4 classroom, again, aging, some of the aging pictures showed maybe a bit more in terms of stereotypes, glasses, wrinkles, but overall it was fairly positive. And in terms of dementia, there were really only a few of the students who knew something about dementia, and those were personal experiences with grandparents. Here's a couple of the grade 3-4 pictures that were depicting their ideas around dementia. And you can see that it's a much more negative, whoops, there's my time, a much more negative kind of an image. So I'm just going to quickly show grade 7s, again, older people, fairly positive. People with dementia become a much more difficult concept for them to draw and articulate, but definitely full of sort of losses and disabilities. And by the time we get to grade 12, it's clear that the ideas around dementia are all around losing your mind, losing yourself, losing your identity. So the education pieces were built around this idea that there's a lack of knowledge, and there's actually an increased level of fear as students went across the grade levels. These are just, they're kind of the main points that we talked about in each of the education sessions that we built. The children did a tree of intention at the end. That was a way for them to look at all the things they had learned at the end of the sessions and then make some intentional choices about ways to support quality of life in older people. And we had a person who lives with dementia and is an older individual come in and meet the kids, read them a story about living with dementia and make that real life connection. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Candace. This is the invitation poster to our art exhibit that just opened yesterday and runs until November 3rd, and that's it.
Thank you, Shelley. All right, so just bear with me here. I'm going to turn on my own screen share. Okay, so in addition to being involved with many of that data gathering, facilitating that Shelley has outlined so well, my job in this project was also to sort of translate the work of, I suppose it's nearly 100 collaborators into this language of contemporary art. And Shelley already has highlighted this, but I also want to shout out UFV's Darren Blakeborough and Zaria Ramirez for working on this exhibition with me, because they were really integral for it. The exhibition represents the culmination of the collective work of so many, and I just want to note that we recognize them all as the necessary authors of this work. So what we're looking at right now is I went in yesterday and I took some images and video of the exhibition to show you. So there's a table in the front, in the foreground here, and it's one of those tables that slide under a hospital bed that you would eat food off of. On that table is a bit of audio equipment with some headphones, and that audio equipment is the text from the studies that we've done, so the actual perceptions of students. There's 2 chairs, and the chairs are facing a screen. It's a transparent screen. On that screen is a projection of the images that you've seen some samples of so far. These images have been kind of turned into a bit of a conglomerate that we animated. So there's sort of chunky bits that kind of feed in from one image to another. Pieces will sort of fall away or bleed through in a way that I think is quite reminiscent of memory. And if you walk around that screen, so I'll just show you another view, because it's transparent, the image comes through the other side and it will actually project onto you and your body as you're walking around that screen. So looking a bit further back into the gallery space, you'll see this object here, right? And this is a collection of mobility aids. And this kind of came about because the students we found were really fixated on the objects of aging. So they talk a lot about wheelchairs, walkers, canes, in a lot of the things that we've gathered from them. And you'll hear some of that in the audio component that I'll show you later. And I was really obsessed with this obsession. So I ruminated a lot on this, and I liked the idea of these objects and sort of mountaining up in the imaginations of these children into something that was maybe less a functional mobility aid and more a symbolic totem onto which their perceptions were projected. So that's how this aspect of the exhibition came about. So Zaria and I built this mountain that looks like kind of like a machine with cogs, or maybe some kind of vehicle from Mad Max, but it's moved quite away from, you know, the original intents of any of these individual objects. And I'll just switch the image here. So onto these, in this mountain here, we have 3 projectors that are cycling with more drawings, and we've taken bed sheets and we've kind of tucked them in and woven them in at key points to kind of hold these projections. They don't translate well over the image, but you'll see them a little bit better in the space. And you know, art is this interesting thing because it requires an aesthetic relationship to space and event that kind of boosts up your critical reflection of the world. And I think art, or at least good art, maybe we'll say, isn't going to give you an answer about what it's all about, because, you know, it's that sort of wiggling possibility that gives art its political potential in the first place, this sort of idea that art can change the world, right? But art does frame itself in the fabric of the world. Framing is a sort of bracketing off, an establishment of relationships. And in terms of framing, I think one of the things that we've worked really hard to do is outline what this exhibition isn't. Right? So it's not in any way meant to enlighten or illuminate what it's like to be an older person or a person living with dementia. And it's not a comment on ability or a proxy for lived experience. I think it asks you to look at impressions. I mean, it's literally an archive of beliefs and values gathered from the study. And I think it asks you to disentangle social perceptions from the actual lived experiences of older adults living with dementia. And this is not because there are real experiences offered, but in fact, because they're not. So as we've said, they are profoundly absent, right? So this absence is quite a loud absence. So I'm going to end now. I know I don't have a lot of time to kind of talk you through this exhibition, but I want to end by actually showing you things. Show, not tell is always the theme in art. So I'm going to give you a 2-minute look at the animated piece that I spoke about at the beginning and a quick video tour of the show. And I'm going to run that track that Darren worked so hard on in the background so you can hear some of these impressions yourselves. And I want to encourage you to see the show. As Shelley said, it's in the Gallery and B building on the Abbotsford campus, and our closing reception is on November 3rd from 4 to 6 p.m. All right.
Is when memories start to go away.
Old is when you feel your youth fade.
Older people are forgetful, unorganized,
Does having dementia hurt?
need words repeated to them, and are stressed.
She is sometimes swept away in her memory.
When you get older, you get weaker.
Their body is always aching.
An older person is a billion years old.
Old age would be good because you have time to spend on yourself and just be relaxed. You are probably at peace with yourself.
As I am old, I would be full of experiences and lesson, which I feel makes a wise person.
Old age can be good by gaining wisdom through the years.
I hope my hair doesn't turn white.
An older person would need comfort and love to have a good life until the end.
I hope my legs don't hurt.
I think life with dementia would be lonely and hard because you can't remember anything and feel trapped in the past.
I hope I'm not bored and still experiencing life.
Also, the inability to make more happy memories with your loved ones.
I want to be wise with my knowledge of life.
When you get older, you get weaker.
Things help them keep walking. Older people use wheelchairs. Old is when you get smaller and others get taller.
I will not be able to make new memories.
The subconscious is reaching for the memory bank in the mind, but the subconscious is blocked by a brick wall.
It would be very lonely. I would feel like I was stuck in a bad nightmare.
I would have hearing
Old
aids.
people use walkers and canes and wheelchairs.
Older people are forgetful.
My grandma uses a cane and a wheelchair.
My idea of an old person was any old person I've seen before. In real life, TV, and media.
Year by year, people get old. It's okay. That's just life.
Their stories may sometimes sound confusing, but they have a big idea behind them.
I think I would split my time between being blissfully unaware and scared about all the things I can no longer remember.
I will be sitting on my chair in front of the TV with my husband watching Jeopardy.
In my opinion, having dementia is like losing your identity.
I picture dementia being incredibly lonely.
It's like you cannot even recognize yourself.
Frustrated because of loss of memory and being in constant worry.
I feel like
I would see people I can't remember
or despair,
crying because I can't remember them.
condition getting worse.
And I feel like it would be harder on other people instead of me.
I think it would be hard to never really know where you are and having to trust that the people taking care of you have your best interest.
The beginning started organized, but later on, the pattern became unorderly. Question marks symbolize confusion. Red symbolizes anger.
I let their eyes be white to represent their loss of memory and confusion.
It was just an idea of an older person.
My first piece was based on my grandmother. In the drawing, I drew her as I remember her when I see her almost every week. I drew her with a green scarf that she wears as it came from our culture and religion. I also pictured my grandmother's face a bit more crabby, but in a loving manner.
This is my Nana. She's 61. She's excited to see me today. I watch movies with her.
A laugh and smile lines. Gray, white, and black hair. A face that has seen sorrow and joy, and disorderly eyebrows. The eyes are blue and slightly faded, with a twinkle, just like my Opa's eyes, in that they hold a wealth of knowledge, humor, and wisdom.
She tries to see past blank spots in her mind.
Whenever I see an old person, they're always smiling. My life will be born when I'm old.
To me, my idea of a person living with dementia is a normal-looking person. I don't think they will look any different from someone without dementia.
I don't think dementia would affect someone's outward appearance.
If I had dementia, I would feel trapped and stuck in my own body, being helpless and not knowing what to do, being lost and feeling guilt of forgetting.
If I had dementia, it would be very bad.
My grandmother had dementia.
I would not be here if I had dementia.
Dementia doesn't change who you are. Soon the time will end.
My grandfather, I like him a lot, and he teaches me a lot of things. He is 69 years old, but he still works on his yard and garden. This morning, he was planting a new tree in his front yard.
I would have glasses and need help walking. I would probably be in care at hospice at some point.
I think that I would prefer to spend as much time as I can with my family.
All right, that's us.
Thank you so much, Candace and Shelley, for sharing this project. Such an interesting, creative, critical hybrid here of like scholarship in a more traditional sense, and then mixed with our artistic installation. Super interesting. And now I'll definitely be going back to the space and having more of a look around. Thank you.
Can I just add my thanks to? I was kind of thrown off when you stopped the video. I was actually enjoying listening to all of the learning there. It's a shame we have such limited time, but you did say that November 3rd from 4 to 6 is your closing event, and it's ongoing now, so we can actually go to the B building and see everything from start to finish.
Yeah, thanks for highlighting that, Rita. That's great. Yeah, it is November 3rd. That's our closing. So it'll be from 4 to 6 if you'd like to join us there. But it is open every day, every weekday from noon until, I want to say 4 or 5, but the regular gallery closing time, I should really have these numbers nailed down by now. But yeah. So you're welcome to come in anytime between now and November 3rd.
Excellent.
By my calculations, you can go to Noah's book launch and then down to the gallery maybe at the same time, because I think by coincidence. So you can have a great UFE day.
All right, what time is the book launch, Noah? If you could just repeat that again, maybe we need to let me just see if I can.
So it looks like November 3rd from at 4 is sort of a crowded spot on, I guess, time slot on campus, but it is unfortunately at the same time. But like I said, like I think like Alex said, you could pop by both and that's not a problem.
Perfect.
Yeah, we have one comment from the Q&A just remarking as well that commenting on what a powerful way to sort of express this this project through the art installation. See if we have.
So
Rita, you have one of the quotes there. Old is when you go smaller and others become taller. Yeah, the mix, I found it's a very affecting mix of positive, like there's the occasional positive remark, and then some of the other ones, it was very touching, I have to admit. Noah, you have your hand up. Did you have a question as well? Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a question. I mean, first of all, I wanted to say, Shelley and Candace, what a cool project. I love the mix of research and advocacy and art and all of it kind of coming together. Also, like on the personal side, my fiance is a physiotherapist in long-term care. So I feel like I have her stories of aging and of dementia and things like that in my own life. And this kind of really resonated with that. But I wanted to know, like, where did this idea of having the students draw their ideas of aging come from? Because I find that such a cool idea or thought about sort of doing kind of like interview research, but in a different way.
Maybe I can speak a little bit to that. I was interested to know what children think early, because we know that ageism does begin early with, you know, familial and social ideas that begin to influence and inform the way young people think. But when we went into the grade 1 classroom, you know, it's clear they have limited literacy, so they have limited ability to express themselves in a written form. What Candace and I did as the students drew their ideas, we asked them to tell us about your picture, and then we scribed a little bit of what they had said, and that's a typical teaching strategy for students that age. But I think that I also originally just wanted to move away. I'm very interested in the way arts-based methods help to express feelings and thoughts. And it can be really hard to ask someone, tell me what you think about someone who lives with dementia. And even when I ask that of adults, it often it becomes it becomes a story, and the story is actually richer than kind of a linear narrative. So I think it was a bit of all those things. And,
Yeah,
and Candace, you can speak to the...
Yeah, just to layer onto that, I think, you know, in terms of the actual event and exercise of making an art piece, right? I think there's this sort of unfolding that happens. Like one can start on a general thought or sketch in their mind of what they think, you know, whatever the prompt is, an older person living with dementia looks like. They might not have that fully formed. It's just a seed, but you can start a drawing with just a seed, and then the drawing kind of unfolds and develops as you go. So it kind of asks a little bit less of the person, right? It doesn't tell them that they need to kind of collect everything all at once and provide it, but it gives them space to kind of feel it out in ways that can sometimes, I think, as an artist, can sometimes be very surprising to the person making the work.
Thank you, Shelley and Candace. I'm also very touched by your work, and this really reminds me of my own grandparents as well. They're still alive, but one of them is on wheelchair and is experiencing some dementia. So thank you for your work. This is really eye-opening, and we have another comment from the attendee. She was sharing some personal experiences as well about when my grandmother had dementia. She would tell incredible stories about things that never happened, but that had elements drawn from things that she really did experience. She was fixated on telling lots of these kids of stories, and they were unsettling sometimes, since we knew they had never happened, but that did include things that had happened, but also entertaining and wonderful in many ways. And she also mentioned that there's an interesting overlap or connection between two presentations about the elements of storytelling. So it's interesting to see the discussion of storytelling in both presentations. She's reflecting on this. Yeah. For me personally, as a literature professor, I also find that the power of storytelling, right? It's about personal experience and how that can provide a much more nuanced narrative as a way to complicate the macro narratives or grand narratives. So yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, and I wanted to just add on to, in terms of amplifying that comment, that I also think that there's a little bit of overlap in our conversations as well, in terms of how these stories are sort of told through a classroom environment, from some of what Noah was saying, and how these ideas kind of leverage themselves into our cultural knowledge from, you know, their injection at the school level.
Yeah, that's an interesting connection too. I was thinking about the storytelling aspect and narratives as Amy was, but also thinking about the role, how the storytelling, where it happens, is so important too. So in both cases, interesting how both projects, which are very different in many ways in terms of subject matter and demographics being studied and talked about, that thinking about the role that the classroom plays and institutions like classrooms play as important venues for circulating narratives that then become taken up as like, so we have these macro narratives and you might accept or resist them or want to work against them, but like, where do you need to go to put new narratives or different narratives into the, try not to say pipeline, that doesn't seem like the right metaphor here, but yeah, so thinking about the classroom as a place for narratives, but also a place where you might be able to change narratives. I don't know, would any of you, would you want to speak to that a little bit more if you want?
For sure. I go back to the strategies outlined by the WHO when we're looking at how to address systemic ageism, and you know, the idea that education is a pivotal piece. Studies that have looked at the antecedents for ageism, really, there's a few kind of characteristics that factor in, and one of them is lack of education and lack of meaningful connection to an older person. And within the crowded curriculum, that is the K-12 curriculum, there is nothing about age and nothing about dementia. And I was particularly struck as we went through all the data gathering exercises last year and sessions, and the lack of knowledge about dementia was a bit startling to me, not so much maybe at the grade 1, but at the grade 3, 4, at the grade 7. And in grade 12, I had the word fear on one of the slides there. And I spent some time in each of the classes doing some teaching. So, you know, that was kind of my promise to the teachers. I'll come back and I'll spend a day or a class talking about age and dementia. And what the grade 12s were so fearful of was that they would be diagnosed with dementia. And they spent, I can't even count the number of questions around the fact that dementia is incurable and that you can be younger as well, although it is primarily a diagnosis of older people. There are certainly types of dementia that are young onset. And so these students were actually really fearful of dementia, not so fearful of old age. That seemed to be an expectation, and it tells me then that we have a need. So there's a gap in the way we educate people, and back to that demographic imperative. As we have an aging population, we will have an increasing number of people who live with dementia. So I think we have a responsibility.
Absolutely, very interesting. Thank you for elaborating on that.
Can I jump in and comment on the classroom as well? Do we have time?
Yeah, yes, yeah, we have a minute or two. Yeah.
I guess just quickly, yeah, I think it's so interesting to think of the classroom as a space for storytelling and also kind of a political space. And there's sort of like two elements of this. I think on the one hand, there's a lot of trust involved in the classroom, right? Like teachers are people in positions of trust. And so I think that's why the classroom then becomes kind of such a useful space for advocacy to take place, but also for people to learn about other political values, things like that. And then also I think like reflecting on the election that we just had. And I think across Canada, people are talking like this is, because of the way sort of the culture war dynamic is playing out. classroom and the role of school board trustee, like these elections are becoming more heated sometimes than mayoral or city council races. So I think the classroom is going to be sort of at the forefront of political discussions for some time.
That's interesting context for that. Yeah, to think about local political debates in the context of all of this. Thank you, Noah. Thank you to all our presenters. Rita, would you like to, I'll turn the floor over to Rita to conclude our session, I think.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly jump on something Noah just said. I'm curious if, I know this is going on in the States at the moment, but I'm curious if the conversations, meaningful conversations like this that actually impact political decisions will begin to be vetoed in the classrooms. I'm not sure, because there seems to be a lot of gatekeeping as to what can be shared and not shared in the classrooms these days. So I'm just curious about that aspect. But I'd like to thank everyone for coming. I just wanted to also comment that some of the comments from the kids actually echoed some of my own fears. So I think it's not really unique to to these young ones. I don't know a lot about dementia, so thank you for your presentations of it that made it engaging. And Noah, thank you for your very thoughtful storytelling about perceptions of gun ownership in the States. And for our next presentation, which I hope everyone will attend, starting happening November 17th, same time, we have, I'm not even going to try pronouncing her name because I've tried to practice it, but I just can't. But I'll say Miss Hart, and it's going to be the Canadian city poet and civic voice. And then Sumin Fang, who's a colleague of mine, she's going to be presenting on why users participate in crowdsourcing communities via mobile fitness apps and the implications of that. We also have an upcoming event that SSI partners with the Race and Anti-Racism Network. So I'm just going to put that really quickly up there. If I could just see, if I can do that really quickly, but the announcement is going to be going out. We are having a lunch and learn discussion on November 3rd. So right after this, I will be planning to visit B Building and Noah's book launch. A lot of things are happening on November 3rd, which is why I was asking for the time. This is a Zoom presentation, and so that will make it kind of easy. So everyone is welcome to attend this as well. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Alex?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you to our presenters. Super interesting. Like I said, the session's been recorded as well. So we'll be we're looking on finding a more permanent space for some of these presentations. But hopefully the conversations can continue, and I look forward to seeing some of you in the hall so we can follow up on some of this. You know, the storytelling stuff is something I'd love to hear more about as well. So thank you again. Hope to see you at some of the future SSIs. We have plans to try and put together an in-person end of the year event where and everyone who's presented could come out and we could have a kind of social gathering at the end of the year. So keep your ears open for that, and we'll be in contact about that sort of in the March, April area. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks very much, guys. It was great.
Thanks, everyone. Really nice meeting you.
Thank you.